Welcome back. O'Connor again, Supply Chain Essentials. And I want to talk about the second part of what we've done in mid-semester of our Global Supply Chain Management unit. And that is the rise of the hardware startup. And you're probably thinking, wow, is this the rise of the machines? Is this the Terminator coming to get you? No, but this is something that is coming to get startups if they are not careful about the easy resources that they are able to get when they crowdfund a new product idea. It is very easy to go to Kickstarter and Indiegogo and launch a campaign and to get money and to promise various layers of rewards for the crowdfunding. But the big problem is not in the downstream, the marketing distribution. The big problem that these startups face is, how do we deal with the upstream? How do we protect our hardware? How do we protect our IP? I want to give you several examples of successful startups that have managed to protect their IP in very ingenious ways with a minimum of resources. Now remember, a startup isn't your Apple, your Samsung, your big multinational who have a team of lawyers who can just endlessly fight and defend what is their own from predators in the supply chain. Startups cannot do that. So what can they do instead? Let me take you through various strategies that I have witnessed through my interviews with startups in the region. The first one is Royale. Now, I want to just explain to you, Royale is a unicorn, and the big idea, what I learned from Royale, is the owner mindset. And actually, this is sort of dovetailing into the previous section where I talked about innovation and change in the supply chain. You're really looking for the owners with a making the best product in the world mindset about investing for the future rather than just in property. Royale is an obvious example of that. It's linking into the previous section and going into this section because Royale is a startup. It is Chinese owned and the owner is a visionary. And why? Because he's just sinking billions of dollars into investment, into automation, making their factory industry 4.0 ready. And also they're visionary about where they see the market for LCD screens in the future. At the moment, when you look in shopping centres, the ones that are open, you have the big giant TV screens, but in the future it could be a screen wrapped around your coffee mug. That's the vision that the owner has. And so that's opposite to the owner mindset of someone that just wants to make a product for the short term, chasing a particular opportunity, and the next year they're chasing another opportunity. Okay, so Royale, how they were able to protect their IP, like what is very common with a lot of startups in China and other developing countries, is that if they have their own factory, they have the natural advantage to protect their IP because they can have that black box, in other words, that shield from the suppliers that bring raw materials and different component parts to the factory. And then if you own the factory, then those suppliers don't know what the final product is going to be like. Number one, that's how you protect, by separation, separating of assembly from the sourcing. What can we learn from a few others? Diffiderm is another example. Diffiderm is a Taiwanese/French startup, and they make a little IoT device that you put on your skin, and it communicates with an app in the iPhone, tells you how much moisture is in your skin. They had the opportunity to expand by going into a joint venture with a Chinese company in mainland China, and they said, nope, we're a little bit concerned about the IP risk. That's what they perceived at the time, and they decided to actually source from Thailand instead, in expanding the assembly of their product. So choice of country is another example of what startups are doing. But what about the startups that really don't have a choice to go to another country, and maybe they're in this region, they're in Hong Kong, and naturally they want to work with China because the ecosystem is there. Well, let's look at Gochi Tech. Gochi Tech originally is part of the Charming Pop group, and they make handbags, other accessories for women's clothing ranges, and they have a factory already in Dongguan. So again, Gochi Tech came up with this man bag, and what it meant was that it already had a power bank inside the man bag. You put your phone inside, it automatically charges over time. So how are they able to protect the IP? Because they own the factory in Dongguan. What about Grom? Grom 3D printing. They make the digital. They digitalize your footprint when you're at an orthopedic doctor around the world. The digital copy is sent to Grom, and Grom sends it to their factory in China. They've got their 3D printers, and then they make the sole, and that's sent back to the clinic wherever it is in the world. So how can they protect their IP? Well, that's very easy, because no one foot is the same of anyone around the world. So therefore, it's completely customizable. So customization is another way of protecting your IP. Okay, iDummy. iDummy, what do they make? They make a mannequin, and originally came out of one of the departments of Hong Kong Polytechnic University, their fashion division. And this is a mannequin that can be adjusted breadth, width, height in terms of putting in coordinates in your iPhone with the app. And this is perfect for actually demonstrating different sizes of clothes in any department store. You don't need to adjust the mannequin. These units can cost anywhere between 10,000 and 20,000 US dollars. So you can imagine the IP is very important for this unit. But also, if you had a partner or a factory to make these, they would already need to have the ingenuity to produce at a very high quality. So what did iDummy do? They ended up partnering with Winsim, which is a swimwear manufacturer in China. Obviously, the swimwear manufacturer had the assembly lines, and they were able to adjust and become the main assembler of the iDummy as they ramp up the units for sales around the world. Okay, so you're thinking, what about the IP protection? Well, number one, Winsim is already established brand. It's not just a supplier that comes here for the opportunity. So they have their own brand reputation, not to be labeled as an IP fraudster. Okay, and also they had the skills and capability to make the units at such a high quality. As you can see here, the units had to be of very high quality because there's machinery operations involved in every one of these units. Okay, what about Ambi Climate? Ambi Climate made a little device that connected with your air conditioner. Yes, and you can actually adjust your air conditioner based on your iPhone, and this device communicate to your air conditioner and to the app in your iPhone. So how did they protect their IP? It was through stage development. On the first stage, they made a prototype run of 500 units. On the second stage, they did soft tooling with a factory in Shenzhen across the border. And soft tooling meant that that factory could only do a run of 2,000 or 3,000, and then the tooling would be worn out, and the factory couldn't actually run the same amount again and sell them out the back door, which does happen in developing countries. Finally, on a third stage, they wanted to go to full ramp up production, making 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 units for distribution around the world. So they called on a friend, John Bunford, the person below, and he has a lot of connections with factories in Shenzhen, knows the good ones, good relationships. So they worked with the network to find a suitable factory to do a larger run of 10, 15,000 units. So they staged their development until they got the final unit correct for distribution worldwide. They didn't want to have a copy going out to the world at the prototyping stage, which was sort of 12 months earlier. You see what I mean? Like all these startups, within 12 months, your product is going to be copied anyway, but you just need that 12 months advance into the market to establish your brand, to establish your quality, to establish repeat sales, customers coming back, customers using word of mouth, and so forth. So that's how Ambi Climate dealt with their IP challenge. What about RotorX, drone racing? Drone, yes! Okay, RotorX, the big IP for them were their motors and the propellers. And so they had a supplier factory make the motors and another one make the propellers. It happened that the supplier that make the propellers, they actually sold more propellers out the back door, and it ended up in a competing drone device that was sold alongside RotorX's drone in another country. And what happened, because the community is so small in drone racing, they actually ratted out this competing drone because it had the same props as RotorX's drone, and actually, what would you call it, they shamed this competing product, making the factory, the supplier factory, to come back to RotorX and to apologize and say we'll not do this again. Wow, community shaming does work in small circles. So there you have it. There's some summaries of how different startups have tried to manage their IP risk without excessive amount of resources. So actually choosing a country, all right, actually owning the factory, which many startups cannot do, but it does work for Royale and Gochi Tech. Customize your product, but in the case of iDummy, it was using the network and working with a really established and a owner of a factory in China that cared about their particular reputation, and they had an equity joint venture with that owner, so they're using incentives to actually incentivize any divergences from IP protection. And then we have Ambi Climate did stage, and then the final stage was doing the networking. RotorX depended on the community and networking. There are other areas that I do talk about, and those Brink and TechPacker. In some ways, Brink is more of a platform for startups to get connection and to bring together the resources of the community of startups so they can actually get at working with trusted factories. And TechPacker was another example where they were more a software as a service, so they didn't see the IP risk as bad. But there you have it, owning the factory, stage development, depending on the community, the network and various platforms, so you can find a trusted factory. That's what the startups are doing, because they don't have the money to hire in the big lawyers to fight for what is rightfully theirs or the time. This is O'Connor, Supply Chain Essentials. We're mid-course through this global supply chain management unit. Stay tuned for the next week, and thank you for joining today. Bye for now.